You know that saying, better late than never? Well, you can call me late, but you can't call me never, because after 4 months of putting this off, finally welcome to the Ego Threadspin 4 value tier list. Back when I made my first video giving the value of each uptype 4 for IDs, I claimed that video was efficiently as possible, and yet it was 53 minutes long. None of that this time. Okay, maybe a little bit of that this time, but less of that this time. We are actually going fast through the Ego and through this video in general, because a lot of these Ego are not very interesting to talk about, and I cannot be bothered to write jokes and be insightful about every single Ego in the game in depth. So, without wasting any more time, here are the factors I will be considering when determining the value of a Threadspin 4. Number 1. How much power it gains. This is pretty simple, but a higher number is better for clashing and damage purposes, and a large amount of Ego actually don't gain any base power or coin power, so gaining it is relatively rare and is good. Gaining attack weight is also factored in here, and god, there is no shortage of those, so for ones that only gain attack weight, their rankings will be determined by how valuable it is to have their effects hit multiple people, or how high their damage number is. Since having attack weight does mean more damage, and damage is good, almost every Ego that gains AoE will be ranked decently high, depending on some circumstances that we'll get into. Number 2. The utility or synergy it gains. Ego are meant to be complementary to the IDs and team they are on, so an Ego gaining some kind of new utility that synergizes with an ID that it did not previously, specifically if the synergy is good, then that is going to skew that Ego's ranking upwards. Number 3. Cost. Plainly put, lower level Ego cost less, so it's easier for them to get value, and higher tier Ego cost more, so it's slightly harder for them to get value. Though this is not nearly as big of a factor here as it was with IDs, since the gap between Zay and Teth and He costs are not nearly as drastic as base 2 and 3 star IDs, with WoW being the exception we will talk about when we get to it. That's all, really. But before we start, a few disclaimers. First and most importantly, I have tried my best to make this list as correct and as informative as possible, but ultimately the best thing to do is to choose for yourself which Ego are going to be best for you to Threadspin to 4, or just choose the ones you enjoy the most. In addition, the placement of these Ego does not necessarily indicate their strength, but just simply how much better they got in the jump from Threadspin 3 to Threadspin 4. Now, here is my tier list. Do note that some of these Ego have been added on manually, and as such are not ordered in the tiers, most notably all of the Season 3 Battle Pass Ego. But I will be talking about them in their proper order, so you'll still know the exact ranking, so long as you watch the full video and don't just skip to the S tier. You wouldn't do that to me, right? Anyways, let's get started proper. Welcome to the... well, you can see the name on screen. But frankly, some Ego have such bad Threadspins that they deserve their own tier of terribleness. Even worse, talking about them is boring, so to maintain my watch time, let's just slap some extremely satisfying Minecraft parkour gameplay right here and rush through these Ego. Starting with what is cast. The Threadspin that does practically nothing, because it only technically makes you go slightly more positive on SP the next turn, but even then, since you have to use an Ego the previous turn, lowering your sanity by 10, it offsets any real benefit. This is complete and utter garbage. Snack Harpoon. Bursting Tremor is hard to rank the value of, and when I say that, I mean it's hard to know if it's bad, terrible, or god-awful. Personally, I think the latter is the best option. Chains of Others becoming less of a self-debuff is an interesting direction to take this Threadspin, but realistically, 3 bind and 3 attack power down is still far too crippling to do anything with. The difference is just not enough. Dimension Shredder Yi Sang. A He Ego that costs so much, yet it gives so little. Literally only 2 more Dimensional Rift, which is neat for Rupture teams, but the amount of Thread and Ego Shards investment here is one of the most egregious ripoffs in the entirety of Limbus. The only reason it's not the absolute worst is because there is a team where you could actually justify Thread spinning this. And to Pathos Mathos. On-kill effects are undeniably in an incredibly strange spot in Limbus, where in focused encounters, deaths just don't happen that much, and human fights are usually over too quickly to find actual use from this. And also, 1 attack power-up is just not that good of a benefit. Okay, that's all of the truly awful stuff, but don't get too excited. The F tier still holds some of the worst of the worst. Most of these have some extremely niche use cases, which just barely get them out of the god-awful tier. Land of Illusion is a prime example of this. So when I first looked at this Ego, I thought the Ego SP efficiency was for the rest of the fight, since it's a weird, new kind of buff. Turns out that's not the case. You could get use out of this, but it would require using a lot of ego the next turn to really feel any amount of value. Oh yeah, by the way, this applies next turn, despite the ego not implying that at all. Gotta love Project Moon. Their translations are always great. Body Sack. The good old days when this description was bugged. It would have been an S tier if the bug description, which said that it was after attack instead of on kill for the extra 2 attack power up, was the reality. But it's not. And again, this is similar to Pathos Mathos, where on-kill effects are so varied in their value, but generally fall on the lower end. Body Sack goes higher, though, for having an objectively better payoff. Speaking of disappointments, Crow's Eye View gains 2 bind application, which is generally useless due to the 3 haste already being given team-wide, meaning you're gonna outspeed whatever you fight. Though admittedly, there are a few small use cases for this, such as with the Red Eyes Ego, or any other kind of bind synergy, or very high Cycle Railway. But for the average player, you will feel almost no difference at all. Impending Day boasts a very special kind of Threadspin, in the sense that it could win an award for least tangible upgrade an ego has ever gotten. The damage number increases are actually good, but man is it uncommon you'll see the increases actually matter. But this can help you proc the on-kill effects easier, it's just still not very good. Suddenly One Day. Gregor's big smacky hand gets its status applications nearly doubled, which, while real neat, does not address the fundamental issues of the statuses being 1. Random, 2. Having no count application, and 3. Random. 4 more of a given status can be, and could be, pretty damn good, if it weren't for the fact that you have no idea what Gregor will roll in his arm slot machine. Branch of Knowledge is a weird one, gaining an attack power-up or protection based on hitting heads or tails. Though the benefits are laughably small, at least they're guaranteed. Still bad though. Okay, I can take a breath now. The truly terrible Threadspins are out of the way, and we can move on to the only mostly bad options. These ones have 1 or 2 actual use cases, but are either too expensive for too little, or just straight up not strong enough. Teetering on the edge of F tier is Hexnail, which actually has an interesting Threadspin, even if it is ultimately pretty worthless. First of all, this inflicts 3 nails, which makes it one of the very few bleed ego in the game. Notice how I use the term bleed very loosely. And then it deals 50% more damage to targets with Curse on them. This is a good damage increase, but since Curse is currently exclusive to Hexnail itself, you need to use Hexnail and hit heads, then within 3 turns, you must use Hexnail again. Since Hexnail is usually used as a setup for stronger nukes anyways, having the main benefit be from getting more damage on subsequent uses kind of feels like a waste, which it very much is. Now let's talk about waste in the most literal sense, or filth, as effervescent Hong Lu would call it. This ego gains 1 more attack weight when the user is below 25% HP, as well as healing 20% more on the corrosion, and gaining that same attack weight condition. Looking at the Hong Lu IDs, the main standout is K-Corp Hong Lu to use this ego. Except K-Corp Hong Lu is rarely actually below 25% HP, and none of the other Hong Lus have any reason to be that low on health, making the extra attack weight relatively worthless. The healing on the corrosion is somehow the best part of this, and even that is just not that good. Ranking 9-2 Faust value is actually hard, because, I mean, how often does one get 6 Absolute Lust Resonance? Especially since team standards are being pushed towards 6 instead of 7 now, reaching this resonance feels like a near impossibility. The only thing helping it out is the fact that hitting multiple parts with this ego might actually be pretty good if you need to apply 10 defense level down to 3 enemies or a certain amount of abnormality parts. The condition is not impossible to meet if you build around it, but it's still hardly worth your time and resources currently. Putting Representation Emitter in this tier feels wrong, because this Threadspin is just it returning to what it used to be before it was nerfed. That said, a net gain of 8 SP team-wide is okay, but it's pretty unlikely that you will ever feel a huge difference on this ego. Regret is in a unique position compared to the other ego, since the Threadspin itself is actually okay, cleansing another debuff, inflicting more tremor and stagger damage, as well as an extra attack weight on the corrosion, but Regret is primarily used for the passive, unless there are some people out there who use it outside of that and I'm mistaken. I personally don't have this ego, so maybe I have no right to speak because I have bad RNG, but since the passive is the main draw, I think it is less important to Threadspin this ego. Again, maybe someone out there disagrees, but frankly, I think Threadspin 2 is all Regret needs to be a truly great option for any Merceau ID. The C tier is home to the mediocre. Generally, this means only slightly meaningful attack weight increases or slight bits of coin power that average out to be just okay, in my opinion. I still wouldn't really recommend any of these, but there's a decent amount of value to be had in certain scenarios. The Shrimp Man. I hate this ego with a burning passion, but despite my hatred, the Threadspin value here is fine. Another attack weight to a total of 3 more healing and SP healing, as well as more SP and HP healing on crit. Like, that's ever gonna happen? Who knows? Maybe once we have a Poison Lu, I can see this in a different light, but as is, yeah, this one isn't going any higher. So, on release of Threadspin 4, I saw a lot of people absolutely drooling at the idea of 7 attack weight, saying how good it is, which, at that time, there were maybe 3 fights in the game total where 7 attack weight would make any difference. At all. Nowadays, yeah, there's a better, serious use case for 7 attack weight, especially with Kanto 5's release. However, the 2 attack weight gained is the only increase present. No exaggeration. An increase of 1 attack weight to 3 attack weight is a large step up in quality, as you'll soon see and hear about. 3 to 5 is still substantial, but 5 to 7 is when the uses become far more niche. All that to say, I really cannot recommend Threadspin 4 Ebony Stem unless you really feel like future-proofing it, or it's your only big nuke ego. But it's better to be patient than to jump the gun on this one. I now welcome you to the We Gain 1 Attack Weight, and that is about it, Gauntlet. We have 4 ego lined up right in a row, and their value gained is all about the same, but they are still ordered. Soda Ryoshu, Screwloose Wallop, Capote Ishmael, and Yasunyata Otis. Though the value gained is relatively close, in my opinion, maybe Screwloose Wallop could be said to be the best due to having 2 AoE Paralyze access, but you also have to gain surgery on yourself, and there are definitely some cases where you don't want to do that. The only ego to gain something besides exactly 1 attack weight on the Awakening here is Soda Ryoshu, which inflicts 1 more sinking. But frankly, if you're using Soda Ryoshu at Threadspin 4 and not the far superior option given to you literally for free, you are probably already depressed enough to inflict more than enough sinking onto your enemies through the sheer force of your sadness alone. I think Otis is the best of these personally, due to the Awakening and Corrosion inflicting Fragile. Potentially having access to 2 enemies taking plus 20% or plus 40% damage in the Corrosion's case from Lust skills is pretty notable. But rationally, that is expensive and unlikely to happen in any actually relevant circumstance. Capote Ishmael is also technically an exception to only gaining 1 attack weight, but it's on the Corrosion, and it goes up to 4 attack weight, which is significant, but overclocking this ego is hard to justify, since the effects are nothing too special, and it is likely you can find similar levels of damage for far cheaper. Moving on from the gauntlet of samey ego, we have La Sangre de Sancho, which gains 3 coin power, bringing it to a total of 26 on heads hit, while also increasing the bleed application by 2, and making the healing effect consistent and not reliant on heads hit. This is genuinely the closest thing to a bleed ego we have, which is terribly sad. But the ego itself does get a pretty alright boost. The only thing holding me back from putting this higher is that ever since base egos were changed to have sanity cost, hitting tails on base Dawn's ego has always felt terrible, but regardless of that, this is the point where ego's benefits can actually be felt consistently in battle, but only just barely. Red Eyes Open is another ego that gains coin power, but with a little bit more added damage too, with 20% more damage on opponents with 3+ bind. The Corrosion gains something similar, but with final power instead of coin power. The coin power and final power conditionals are actually pretty easy to reach, all things considered. The bind is nice in tandem with Red Eyes Closed, but overall, this just does not feel too worth it for the cost. Admittedly, I could be underselling it due to being reliant on bind synergy, which is not too uncommon anymore, but thankfully, this ego will generally be alright at Threadspin 3. Roseate Desire Ishmael boasts an interesting reputation, and this Threadspin 4 continues to stand out as particularly unique. This Threadspin adds 3 more offense level down, as well as 3 bind next turn. A total of 10 offense level down means the opponent loses 3 power in any clash. Combine that with the Paralyze, and that means that a lot of enemies get completely crippled, so long as your Ishmael is going decently fast. The Corrosion also gains a small buff, but there's almost no reason to ever use the Corrosion version of Roseate Desire. Ultimately, this Threadspin lives or dies by how much you like the idea of +1 clash power, which I think is about a C tier level of value. Pop quiz. If you had to take a guess which ID the Charge Ego works best with, who would you choose? A. Rabbit Heathcliff, the Charge ID. B. Base Heathcliff, who perfectly fuels it. C. A Range Wrench Tobo, who is more self-loathing than a Redditor. Yeah, it's C. Telebo gains some decent power on the Awakening, held back by Heathcliff's lack of an actual charge ID, and therefore his lack of any meaningful way to get charge on his own, but the real buff here is 5 more skill power on that Corrosion, in combination with Suncliff. Now, the jump from a 49 roll to a 54 roll is genuinely hard to wrap my head around. But a number increase is a number increase, and regardless of how good it actually is, I mean, at least you're rolling a 54. For Blind Obsession Ryoshu, her attack weight is increased from 2 to 3, which is trickier to quantify than most other attack weight increases, but if we assume the main benefit we want is the charge count on hit and on crit, then the increase from Threadspin 3 to 4 is actually interesting, if nothing else. Since if you crit and hit 3 targets, you gain 11 charge next turn, meaning Warp Ryoshu can go straight into a skill 2 at 23 power on turn 2. Albeit, this costs 20 sanity, and the chance to crit is only 20% with the 4 poise potency given. However, this could also be used later into the fight to recover charge after a DD EDR, so I do think the extra charge gain could be useful in either context, as well as plenty of other places. Welcome to the B tier, where we have attack weight, and more attack weight, with very few exceptions. This is the thing about Threadspinning Ego that seems to confuse people the most. Specifically, how do you judge the value of attack weight? So I will be going a bit more in depth for my reasoning about why certain Ego are where they are in proportion to other Ego that gain basically the same benefit. Truthfully, Sunshower Otis just barely makes her way into the B tier. She gains a lot of small benefits. 1 more poise count before the attack, she inflicts 2 more sinking, 1 more bind, 1 more sinking count on crit, as well as the obvious 1 more attack weight. And that is just the Awakening. The Corrosion actually has some interesting stuff added on too, such as the attack weight, 2 more sinking and rupture, the same 1 more bind, and +1 to the rupture and sinking counts on crit. I think the Corrosion becomes genuinely viable at Threadspin 4, and if you can crit on it often enough, you can actually stack sinking and rupture pretty well. Either way, 2 attack weight on a high rolling Ego, and more poise count helps this Ego to make it to the bottom of B tier. I have felt this way about a lot of Ego so far, and I will continue to say it, but this is hard to rank. Threadspin 4 gives this Corrosion 3 attack weight, but more importantly, gives 3 more charge for a total of 10, as well as a 50% increase in the amount of spark discharge, inflicting 15 instead of 10. Now the real question is, how much use do you get out of either one? The Corrosion attack weight, or spark discharge? Frankly, this is near the bottom of B tier simply because I don't think this is terrible value and has a solid niche with Rupture teams, especially with the release of W.E. Sang. So if you like Rupture and run Rose Gregor on Rupture teams, then this is maybe an investment to consider. Unlike his Faustian counterpart, 9-2 Sinclair learned that, wow, 6 is a big number, and instead only asked for 4 Lost Absolute Resonance for a total of 5 attack weight, which is way more generous. At Threadspin 3, this can only get up to 4 attack weight, so adding another one on is pretty good, especially with the added burn potency, and condition stating Tails hit if target has 10 plus burn, inflict 1 attack power down and 1 defense power down next turn. As well, the Corrosion gains the same attack weight conditional and inflicts 1 more Lust Fragility next turn. 10 plus burn is a very simple condition and nets you an attack power down, and a mostly useless defense power down, but regardless. The additional attack weight also helps supplement some potentially missing damage in case you hit heads, and overall makes this a pretty good Threadspin all around. So, Roseate Desire Honglu was one of the worst Ego in the game at Threadspin 3 in my opinion, and Threadspin 4 certainly does save it from that title. 3 attack weight makes its decently high roll feel more viable, and 5 defense level down up from 4 helps with some additional follow-up damage, even if it is speed range dependent. If you're lacking a Teth for Honglu and have Lust and Envy to burn, then this Threadspin is pretty mandatory for Roseate, but it's still not a great amount of value, since the Ego is not great at the end of the day. Lifetime Stu Dawn is actually not too dissimilar to Roseate Honglu, even though this ego was much more viable than Roseate at Threadspin 3. Lifetime Dawn literally only gains attack weight, but the attack weight matters more on Dawn than on Roseate Honglu, in my opinion. Since, 1, this spreads burn count in case you want it, but more importantly, Lifetime Stu works much better as a damaging ego, boosting its damage by owned lust resources and making it capable of nuking down 3 smaller foes or hitting 2 to 3 parts of an abnormality with large amounts of damage. So while this is a simple buff, it boasts a surprisingly high damage output that is impressive enough to earn a spot in the B tier. Oh boy. So 4th Match Flame Yi Sang. It gains 6 more burn on heads hit and 2 more attack weight to a total of 5, which is good, but there is a glaring issue with this ego that is not addressed by this Threadspin, and that is how low it rolls. A 20 max roll is not an uncommon number to be a lot of egos' floor. However, the burn potency is actually quite a bit more now, and if you think of it this way, hitting 5 targets with this and hitting heads is a total of 50 burn, which surely accounts for something. It's just a shame that this ego is not given any base or coin power, despite it clearly being the ego's biggest flaw, but it's still an alright amount of value if you so choose to use it. Let's get this over with quickly. Lifetime Sue Sinclair gets 4 more attack weight, bringing it to that coveted 7 attack weight. This helps make his healing spread and ego amp more viable, since you can target more of your team. Lifetime Sue Sinclair is still definitely one of the ego of all time, considering that sweet 10 roll. But this Threadspin 4 alone does save it from being the absolute bottom of the barrel. It's hard to deny the value gained here, despite my biases, which is more than what I can say for something like Soda Honglu. Stupid shrimp man. Lantern Sinclair's below 50% HP condition gives an additional attack weight now, and the Rupture and Rupture Count application on his Awakening and Corrosion respectively have been made consistent. Most importantly though, the healing percentage jumps from 12% to 15% of max HP. This means that, when hitting 3 targets, Lantern Sinclair heals 9% more max HP total. Factor in the potential to hit an additional enemy, and this Threadspin is pretty good. The second to last of our new Battle Pass ego, and Effervescent Corrosion gets a good amount from the Threadspin, gaining a somewhat easy to activate attack weight condition reliant on the enemy's current HP, which is generally more reliable than Honglu's condition. The main draw here is the Tremor. At Threadspin 3, the Tremor is 3 potency and 5 count, but jumps to 7 count at Threadspin 4. It also consistently bursts Tremor now, if you care. This gets Rosebanner Rodian most of the way there to getting her skill 2 coin power, as well as just giving a lot of Tremor IDs a lot of wiggle room to reduce count if they have that pesky line of text. Effervescent Rodian has some seriously interesting use cases, especially considering the amount of strong Tremor IDs we saw last season. It's just a shame it's a Teth. Now, this is going to be practically in direct contrast to what I said about Ebony Stem, but Sunshower's Threadspin is good, and it is not just because of the attack weight, though that is a factor. It also gains more power on the Awakening Corrosion. Now, 5 power would place it at about the same place as Telepole Heathcliff, right? Well, Sunshower can hit 4 more units, and just generally does more damage. So making this ego stronger is a pretty good idea. Bearing in mind that you need to be hitting heads on that Awakening, or be going into 7-person fights / fights against units with slot weight to truly feel the effects of the Threadspin. Now all that being said, as I was editing this video, Project Moon announced that they are changing Sunshower Yi Sang into a WoW ego, which certainly does give this current He version of Sunshower Yi Sang a boost in priority. So if you ever feel like using Threadspin for Sunshower Yi Sang, now is the time to invest while stocks are on the rise. Originally, I had Leisure Domain in the S tier, and then the A tier, and now it has fallen to the middle of B tier. Leisure Domain gains 2 more Tremor application, and the big thing, consistency on his paralysis. Now look, attack weight plus paralyze is a great combo, and making it consistent and not rely on heads hit sounds great. But the value for this Threadspin is actually lessened due to how good Leisure Domain is already. Only costing 10 sanity means you have an 85% chance to be hitting heads and getting off the 4 paralyze. Those are very good odds, and realistically you are not Threadspinning this for the 2 Tremor, or at least I hope you aren't. On the other hand though, since Leisure Domain is so often spammed, making the paralyze be consistent at lower sanity could also be really good. However, I had to put it right here, simply due to how little Leisure Domain actually gets. Pursuance is known for its healing, and this Threadspin does not increase the healing. However, consider, this ego rolls very well. A 34 on heads hit. Hitting 3 people instead of 1 is good. Yeah, it's easy as that. Another one of those really strange ego. 4th match Flame Rodian is negative coin on Awakening, and that is not changed by Threadspin 4. What is added, and say it with me, is 2 attack weight to the Awakening. And more uniquely, the Corrosion also gained 2 attack weight to become a 5 weight nuke skill. The key to what makes this ego actually worth Threadspinning more than the others is, other than potential to roll high, which is on quite a few ego to be fair, but AoE Wrath Fragility is actually pretty neat, especially when it is 3 of it. And we have a sufficient amount of Wrath skills now to properly follow up on this. Just barely falling short of the A tier is Faust Telepole. This is very slightly the worst of the attack weight plus Paralyze ego, and it's simply due to being a he ego that she falls below the 2 at the bottom of A tier, as well as having slightly worse actual effects outside of the Paralyze. I'll clarify more once we get to the other 2, but for now, she's right here. We finally enter the A tier, which houses the ego I could all genuinely recommend investing in. So long as you will actually use them, of course. Most all of these have very tangible increases to numbers, or their attack weight increases matter more than most other ego. Very quickly following up on Telepole Faust, we have both Wishing Cairn and AEDD, which are both ego that already inflicted Paralyze, and now do so at 3 attack weight. Which one is exactly better is really a matter of perspective. AEDD Heathcliff's Paralyze is consistent, rolls higher, and has 1 Gloom Fragility. Meanwhile, Wishing Cairn has inconsistent Paralyze, but has Spice Bushy Sang synergy for plus 30% more damage, and 2 Sloth Fragility, meaning it will deal more damage and lead to more damage. Putting them in around the same tier feels fair, and I think they are a step up from Telepole Faust, whose effects feel lackluster compared to these 2. So they get the bottom of A tier compared to her. Capote Merceau is in a very unique position. Firstly, this is one of those rare ego to actually see a coin power increase at Threadspin 4, which makes it the easiest access to a really big number, rolling a comical 45 on heads hit and for only 5 resources. Frankly, it is only in extremely niche circumstances that you need to clash this high, but it is still a damage increase. Now, while the burn number increases are neat, the real thing to talk about is the Corrosion, which gains attack weight. To put it simply, this Corrosion goes pretty crazy on burn teams, and even outside of them, it hits like a truck. Of course, the downside is that you need to overclock, however, I can actually recommend overclocking this ego simply due to how powerful it is. It is still slightly held back by the main value being locked behind Corrosion, but is still certainly an A tier for the coin power and the Corrosion combined. Fragile is a good effect. Hot take, I know, and so is Rupture. Maybe actually a lukewarm take, so long as you play around it, of course. But making Dimension Shredder Honglu AoE means you have easier access to spreading Fragile, Rupture count, and most importantly, death to more enemies/parts. The Corrosion being 3 attack weight now also justifies using it even more, especially due to the sheer amount of Fragile you can have set up alongside just dealing great damage. The synergy with W Honglu also cannot be ignored, but that was kind of present at Threadspin 3, but it's just even more payoff now. Okay, it is time to talk about Fluid Sac, and why I think its Threadspin, while good, is a little overrated. Now, I will say, this new condition, which gives allies 10 more SP or 25 SP total after hitting heads with Fluid Sac, is good. It's very strong, but here's the thing. I think this Threadspin might be S tier for story content, where your sanity is often reset to 0, meaning hitting heads is impactful. But the issue is the consistency of hitting heads is lower at low sanity, and while you could reset until you hit heads, that is still a flaw of the ego. Now, let's say Faust is at 45 sanity, you need to hit a 75% chance when you are rolling to attack with Fluid Sac, meaning you only get value out of this ego 75% of the time at best. But it's really even less, since a lot of the time in Limbus Company, you and your whole team are at max sanity, with no real dips in it outside of ego, which Threadspin 3 Fluid Sac generally handles just fine. I just simply cannot see this being higher than A tier, even though it is still great, it's not close to the best, simply due to how good Fluid Sac already is at Threadspin 3. Lantern Gregor used to be such an awful ego, for a few reasons. The most notable being there used to be only one real Gregor ID, which was G-Corp, who did not care about the healing, and the fact that Lantern healed basically nothing. With Threadspin 4 and Zwei/Pirate Gregor's releases, Lantern is now attack weight 3, meaning it does a lot more damage, leading to more healing, and its use cases are more varied, in the sense that it actually has some seriously good use with Zwei Gregor to heal him up. We have seen a lot of conditional attack weight increases, but none are quite as easy as Yasun Yaratad Rupam Heathcliff's conditions, which are practically a built-in +1 to both the Awakening and Corrosion versions. More importantly, the SP healing on that Awakening is increased from 17 to 25. This is a net gain of 32 sanity, which is pretty good, but the Corrosion is the real winner here. While it is expensive, it can hit more targets, meaning the damage up, defense level ups, and the added on fragility really mean Yasunada Heathcliff can be used to set up nuke turns for himself and others just that bit better, alongside dealing that extra bit of more damage from the extra enemy being hit. Red Eyes Closed. So remember how I mentioned fragility being good, like several times, and will continue to mention fragility being good? Well, what if we had an ego that was 3 attack weight, inflicted plus coin drop if 3 bind was applied, and almost always applied 2/ fragility next turn, and guaranteed if the 3 bind is on there, allowing for a free 20% more damage on 3 enemies with slash heals, while also inflicting them with AoE bind next turn. Oh, and in case that is not enough for you, and you want to inflict 3 AoE 2 plus coin drop, simply use the Corrosion version, which will cripple the rolls of almost any abnormality that is using plus coins, and the rolls of 3 regular enemies, as well as the potential to give 3/ fragility instead of 2, with some variance downwards as well. This is one of those examples of the effects of the ego making the attack weight show its true value. AoE plus coin drop means abnormalities that attack with multiple parts can be debuffed equally, and the same philosophy can be applied to the slash fragility. A very worthwhile Threadspin if you are willing to play into the bind synergy or slash damage. And the final tier, S tier. These are the ego you hear talked about when Threadspin 4 is mentioned, and for good reason. For some of these, Threadspin 4 is what made them relevant, and for others, it simply enhanced what made them already strong ego. While I have talked before about how on-hit effects are generally what makes increases to attack weight good, Don Fluid Sac and another ego in the S tier already had extremely high rolls and damage, but they used to be single target. A 3 attack weight, 38 roller that deals extra damage to staggered, low morale, or panicked enemies is a lot of damage. As well, it has the potential to cripple the sanity of tough enemies with lots of sanity. The Corrosion also has an impressive amount of sinking, which has great synergy with a certain ego we will get to soon. Don Fluid Sac hits incredibly hard and could find its way into meta teams running sinking if only Don had a meta ID that doesn't use that other ego. Ryoshu 4th Match Flame. Let me put the damage increase for this ego into perspective for you. At Threadspin level 3, this is 1 attack weight, with no percentage modifier increases. At Threadspin 4, this goes up to 3 attack weight, which is essentially 3 times damage for the ego, which can then be increased by a further 100% if the targets have 20 plus burn, which is really not even a hard condition if you are running a bit of a burn team. This is relatively similar to Don Fluid Sac, but the highs are significantly higher, but this is held back by Ryoshu still not having a burn ID, somehow. Once we get a Ryoshu with burn, this could go a bit higher in value, but even in current Limbus, this ego is very good at Threadspin 4. Forest for the Flames is by far the best Zayn ego to Threadspin to 4. It has both an increase to coin power, which is actually significant here, whereas it previously rolled a 24, it now rolls a 28, making its clashing on the high end of base ego, and insanely good for the value it gives. Specifically, this ego used to give 1 fragile next turn, which was already pretty decent. But Project Moon decided to take inspiration from late night infomercials and double the offer, for a total of 2 fragile next turn, which basically means any Ryoshu ID at will, can spend 2 Lust and 2 Wrath to inflict better Gaze. Oh, and it clashes super high. Even ignoring the 2 fragile, a 28 roll with 6 burn application is pretty decent damage, but the 2 fragile just sends this over the edge to be very, very strong and land in the S tier. Don Telepole is the other ego I mentioned when talking about Don Fluid Sac. I would recommend watching my video covering every charge-related thing in the game, at the time anyways, I talk what makes this Threadspin so annoyingly good, but essentially, this line means that W Dawn gets an instant 20 charge if she hits 2 enemies. And the corrosion also gives more charge count to allies, alongside just dealing the damage that a 3 attack weight Ego does. By the way, I would like to point out that Faust's Telepole very specifically had her charge gain changed from on hit to after attack when she gained AoE. Which just... why? Why can Dawn have it, but not Faust? Whatever. This Ego makes me upset in several hundred ways. It's S tier. It's super good. Let's just move on. And move on we will to a much cooler Ego with some of the prettiest art in the game. Ardor Blossom Star is the last of our 1 to 3 attack weight gainers, and this is the best of the bunch, obviously. The main reason for this is due to Leo Ishmael's existence, synergizing perfectly in literally every way. And Ardor Blossom Star does have something that the other Ego don't, a huge nuke on the corrosion, which gains an even bigger attack weight of 5. Though it comes with the downside of self-damage, this corrosion is near guaranteed to stagger any blunt weak enemy. Ardor Blossom Star just does a lot of damage and has perfect synergy with an already existing strong ID. And of course, it would be foolish to expect the first and currently only WoW Ego in the game to not be pretty reliant on Threadspin 4. But the reason why this Threadspin is so good is actually pretty unique, and it's due to how much sanity it costs. Blind Obsession at Threadspin 3 has a large amount of effects that are reliant on heads or tails hit, notably the damage up / pierce power up buffs, which are arguably the biggest draws to this Ego. Since this costs 35 sanity, at best you are looking at a 60% chance for you to hit heads with the Awakening. And while the corrosion is less of an issue generally, making that consistent is still going to be real nice. Though it's not like that's the only benefit. There is a long list of changes, so just bear with me as I go through them all. Starting with the Awakening, 2 attack weight is gained, making it a total of 7 attack weight, the SP heal is increased from 20 to 25, the charge count is made consistent, and is increased by 2, for a total of 6 charge on hit per hit, the poise count spreading is increased from 1 to 2, and the pierce power up and damage up is changed from after heads attack ends to after attack. The corrosion has the same attack weight of 7 now, the healing and damage up is consistent, and it inflicts 3 Pride Fragility instead of 2. I feel like I should not have to explain why this is a pretty insane upgrade, since netting you 20 more SP alone is pretty alright. Then you add on everything else, and yes, this is absolutely worth your resources if you are going to be using Blind Obsession, especially for those damage up buffs. But you may be wondering, Esku, you just listed off a million effects. How is this not the last Ego on the list? Well... Rhymeshank. It's at this point that I feel the need to remind you that this is a tier list about value, and the undeniable, easiest value you can get is from thread-spinning Rhymeshank to 4. Whereas Blind Obsession gains a lot of really good things from the 4th tier of Threadspin, it's not like most of it was impossible to access. At worst, it was slightly worse effects, yes, but nothing like Rhymeshank. I imagine most people have no idea what Threadspin 3 Rhymeshank looks like, and I don't blame you. It inflicted no sinking potency, just count, which is alright, I guess, in today's context, but back when most sinking you could find was on Mariachi Sinclair, it was easy to ignore and say, maybe it'll be good when there's sinking support. Then Rhymeshank said, alright, bet, I will become sinking, and then it sank all over the place. The Awakening gained 2 more sinking count and 5 sinking potency, for a total of 5x5 sinking alone, which is genuinely really good for a status like sinking, and we still don't have something even this good for rupture. Not even close. The corrosion is just straight up broken, though. 10 sinking potency with 8 sinking count, which means it gained that same +2 sinking count, but it gained 10 whole potency, for a total of 8x10 or 80 damage, assuming gloom damage is neutral. Obviously, this does not sound overpowered on paper, but Limbus is not a game that works in a vacuum. Diechi Rodian and Muller Boatworks Ishmael mean that you can keep this amount of potency going, and even continue to make it stronger, compounding on itself. No other Threadspin in the game turned any other Ego into nearly as much of a menace as what happened with Rhymeshank. It almost deserves its own tier for single-handedly making Gloom such a difficult sin affinity to justify using anywhere else. Hell, in my sub 150 railway run, I did not use Fluid Sac once, simply because I did not want to miss out on Rhymeshank. Who knows, maybe in time Blind Obsession will prove itself to be the better Threadspin, but due to Rhymeshank being a TEF, and it's therefore far cheaper for such a huge benefit, it's hard to imagine Rhymeshank will basically ever be dethroned for having the best Threadspin value in all of Limbus Company. And that is all of them. Here is the tier list in full, with the full context of the entire video, which you definitely watch, and you're not just gonna screenshot this tier list, post it somewhere and say, Esku is stupid, why'd he put this ego? But I do want to reiterate that this is my opinion, and I do think egos are far more subjective due to how they are often used in more niche circumstances than IDs, simply due to how they are mechanically. With IDs, since they are used everywhere in every piece of content, there is a bigger sample size of scenarios in which they can and are used. Since ego are more niche, and considering just how many niche circumstances you can be in Limbus if you so choose, it is inevitable I have missed some small cases where certain Threadspins actually do make a difference, except what is cast, I can confidently say that is very, very worthless. I look forward to following up on this list some months down the line to see how it has changed, but for now, this is what I've got. As always, if you have some ego that you think I underrated, be sure to be unreasonably upset about it in the comments, and subscribe if this video made you boil with unending, unquenchable anger. Besides that, thank you for watching. This video